My boyfriend promised marriage for years but never proposed, so when I said I don't want marriage anymore, he tried to steal my furniture while I was out. Everyone, I'm Sarah, and I have a story that still makes my blood boil every time I think about it. It's about trust, manipulation, and how someone I loved for 5 years tried to literally steal my entire life from under my nose. If you've ever been strung along by empty promises, this story is going to hit close to home. So, let me paint you a picture of where this all started. I met Jake when I was 24, fresh out of college and working my first real job at a marketing firm. He was this charming, confident guy who worked in IT at the same company. You know, that type, always had the perfect joke, always knew exactly what to say to make you feel like the most important person in the room. He swept me off my feet completely. Within 6 months, we were talking about our future together. Jake would bring up marriage casually, like it was this inevitable thing that would happen between us. He'd say things like, when we get married, we should definitely have a destination wedding, or our kids are going to be so cute with your eyes and my sense of humor. I was head over heels, and hearing him talk about our future like that made me feel so secure, so certain that I'd found my person. After we'd been dating for about a year and a half, we decided to move in together. Now, here's where things get important for the rest of this story. I had inherited some money from my grandmother, and I used it to buy most of our furniture. We're talking about a gorgeous leather sectional that cost me $3,000, a dining room set that was another to grand, a king-size bedroom set, kitchen appliances, everything. Jake contributed some smaller items and split the rent with me, but the major furniture pieces, those were all mine, bought with my inheritance money. Jake knew this, obviously. We'd gone furniture shopping together, and he'd even helped me pick out some pieces, but he always acted like everything in our apartment was ours, which I thought was sweet at the time. I loved the idea of building a life together, creating a home that belonged to both of us. I was so naive. As our relationship continued, Jake kept making these marriage promises. Year 2, he said he wanted to save up for the perfect ring. Year 3, he said he wanted to get a promotion first so he could really provide for me. Year 4, it was wanting to pay off his student loans. There was always something, always a reason why next year would be better for getting engaged. But here's the thing, I believed him every single time. Because in between these delays, he'd do things that made me think he was serious. He'd take me to look at wedding venues just to get ideas for the future. He'd point out engagement rings when we walked past jewelry stores. He even had me create a Pinterest board for our someday wedding that I spent hours on, pinning dresses and flowers and decorations for this fantasy wedding that I thought was just around the corner. My friends started getting concerned around Year 3, my best friend Emma would gently ask me if Jake had given me any concrete timeline, and I'd always make excuses for him. He wants to make sure everything is perfect, I'd say. He's just being responsible about our finances, I defended him constantly, even when doubts started creeping into my own mind. The worst part was family gatherings. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family event, I'd get the same questions. When are you two getting married? Any ring yet? We're so excited for your wedding. And Jake would just smile and put his arm around me and say something vague like soon, very soon. I'd feel this mixture of pride that he was claiming me publicly and embarrassment that we were still in the same place we'd been for years. By year 4, I started getting more direct with Jake about timelines. I'd bring up marriage seriously, asking him what his actual plan was. He'd get a little defensive and say things like, "Why are you pressuring me?" Or, "I thought you understood I needed more time." He made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting some clarity after 4 years together. Then came year 5. I was 29, watching all my friends get married and start families, and I was still waiting for this man to make good on 5 years worth of promises. I started feeling like I was wasting my life, like I was putting everything on hold for someone who might never follow through. The breaking point came last March. We were at his cousin's wedding, and Jake spent the entire reception making jokes about how marriage was just a piece of paper and how smart couples didn't need legal documents to prove their love. I sat there listening to him basically mock the institution he'd been promising to enter with me for 5 years, and something inside me just snapped. That night, I confronted him. I asked him point blank if he ever actually intended to marry me or if he'd just been saying what he thought I wanted to hear. He got angry, accused me of attacking him, and said I was being crazy and desperate. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Here I was, asking for clarity about promises he had made, and suddenly I was the crazy one. We had this huge fight where everything came out. I told him I felt manipulated and deceived. He told me I was obsessed with marriage and that maybe we wanted different things. The fight ended with him sleeping on the couch and both of us barely speaking for a week. During that week of silence, I did a lot of thinking. I realized that I'd spent 5 years of my life waiting for someone who had no intention of giving me what he'd promised. But more than that, I realized that I didn't even want to marry someone who could string me along like that. How could I trust someone to be my husband when he'd spent years lying to me about his intentions? So I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided I didn't want to get married anymore. Not to Jake, not to anyone, at least not for a long time. I wanted to focus on myself, my career, my own happiness without tying it to someone else's timeline or promises. I sat Jake down about 2 weeks after our big fight and told him how I felt. I said that I'd spent so long wanting marriage that I'd lost sight of whether I actually wanted to marry him, and that I'd realized I didn't. I told him I wanted to take marriage completely off the table and just see if we could build something real without that pressure. You would think that someone who'd been avoiding marriage for 5 years would be relieved, right? Wrong. Jake completely lost it. He accused me of playing games and trying to manipulate him by reverse psychology. He said I was obviously lying and just trying to force his hand. It was like he couldn't believe that I might actually mean what I was saying. When he realized I was serious, he got this look in his eyes that I'd never seen before. It was almost calculating, like he was processing something. He said he needed time to think about what this meant for our relationship. I told him that was fine, and that maybe we should both take some space to figure out what we really wanted. That's when things got really weird. Jake suddenly became super attentive and sweet. He started doing all these romantic gestures, bringing me flowers, cooking dinner, planning little surprise dates. For about a month, he was like the perfect boyfriend. I started thinking maybe removing the pressure of marriage had actually helped our relationship, but then I started noticing odd things. Jake would ask me random questions about my schedule, like what time I'd be home from work or whether I had any weekend plans. He'd suggest activities that would take me away from the apartment for long periods. He even started encouraging me to spend more time with Emma, which was weird because he'd always been kind of jealous of my friendships before. The weirdest thing was when he suddenly became interested in the movie theater. Jake had never been a big movie person, but suddenly he was suggesting we go to movies all the time. He'd find these random matinee showings of films I'd mentioned wanting to see and insist we go right away. At the time, I thought it was sweet that he was paying attention to my interests. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday in June, and Jake suggested we go see this indie film that was only showing at a theater across town. He said he'd already bought tickets and that we needed to leave right away to make the showtime. I thought it was spontaneous and romantic, so I agreed. We got to the theater, and Jake said he needed to use the bathroom before the movie started. I waited for him by the concession stand for about 10 minutes before I started wondering where he was. When I went to look for him, the bathroom was empty. I checked outside and his car was gone. I was confused and worried at first. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I thought maybe there was some emergency with his family or something. I took an Uber home, expecting to find him there with some explanation. But when I got to our apartment building, I saw a moving truck parked outside. My heart started racing. I ran upstairs and found our apartment door propped open. Inside, there were 3 guys I didn't recognize loading my furniture onto dollies. I started yelling, asking them what the hell they were doing. That's when Jake appeared from the bedroom, directing them to grab the dresser next. When he saw me, his face went completely white. "Sarah, you're supposed to be at the movies." That's when it hit me. The fake movie tickets, the random scheduling questions. All those times he'd encouraged me to leave the apartment. He'd been planning this. I demanded to know what was happening, and he had the audacity to. I demanded to know what was happening, and he had the audacity to tell me he was moving out and taking his half of everything, his half of furniture that I had bought with my own inheritance money, furniture we'd literally shopped for together. With my credit card, I told the movers to stop immediately and showed them receipts on my phone proving that I'd purchased everything they were loading. Jake started arguing with me in front of these strangers, claiming that since we'd lived together for 4 years, he had a right to half of everything. He actually used the phrase common law marriage, which was rich coming from someone who'd spent 5 years avoiding actual marriage. The moving guys were clearly uncomfortable and said they weren't going to get involved in a domestic dispute. They started unloading everything back into the apartment. That's when Jake really lost it. He screamed at me that I had tricked him by saying I didn't want to get married anymore. He said he'd wasted 5 years of his life on me and that I owed him something for that time. He claimed that since he'd invested in our relationship, he deserved compensation in the form of furniture and household items. I was absolutely stunned. This man had strung me along with false promises for 5 years, and now he was acting like I was the one who'd wronged him. He was trying to steal thousands of dollars worth of my belongings because he felt entitled to them after wasting my time. The argument got so heated that one of our neighbors called the building manager, who called the police. When the cops arrived, I showed them all my receipts and bank statements proving that I'd purchased everything. Jake couldn't produce a single receipt for any of the major items he was trying to take. The officers told Jake he needed to remove himself and his belongings immediately, and that he couldn't take anything he couldn't prove he'd purchased. He was furious, but he couldn't argue with legal proof. He grabbed his clothes, his laptop, and a few small items that were actually his, and stormed out, but that wasn't the end of it. Over the next week, Jake sent me dozens of angry texts and emails. He called me every name in the book. He said I'd used him and wasted his time and that I was a manipulative, lying witch, except he didn't use the word witch. The most insane part was when he demanded that I pay him for 4 years of rent because, in his mind, if we weren't going to get married, then I should compensate him for the money he'd spent on rent and utilities in our fake relationship. He actually calculated what he thought I owed him and sent me an itemized bill for over $15,000. I blocked him on everything after that. But the story doesn't end there, because Jake apparently told everyone in our social circle that I had scammed him out of furniture and money. Some people who didn't know the full story actually took his side at first. He painted this picture of himself as a victim who'd been tricked by a manipulative woman who pretended not to want marriage just to hurt him. Thankfully, my real friends knew better. Emma had witnessed years of Jake's empty promises and my growing frustration. She helped me tell our mutual friends the real story, how he'd strung me along for 5 years with fake promises, then tried to steal my belongings when I finally gave up on his lies. The best part of this whole nightmare was what I learned about Jake afterwards. Remember Emma, my best friend? Well, she worked at a different company but knew people who worked with Jake. About a month after our breakup, she heard through the grapevine that Jake had started dating someone new from his office. But here's the kicker: within 3 months of our breakup, he was engaged to this new girl. 3 months after 5 years of telling me he wasn't ready for marriage, he proposed to someone else in 3 months. When I heard that news, I felt this weird mixture of vindication and disgust. vindication because it proved that his excuses about not being ready were complete lies. Disgust because I realized he'd wasted 5 years of my life when he could have just been honest about not wanting to marry me specifically. Looking back now, almost a year later, I can see all the red flags I missed. The way he'd get defensive whenever I asked for clarity about our future. How he'd make me feel guilty for wanting reasonable things like engagement timelines. The way he'd involve me in wedding planning activities to keep me hopeful without actually committing to anything. I also realized that his attempt to steal my furniture wasn't just about money, it was about power and revenge. He couldn't handle that I'd taken control of the situation and stopped waiting for him. He wanted to punish me for not playing along with his games anymore. The experience taught me so much about myself and about relationships. I learned that actions matter more than words, that consistency matters more than grand gestures, and that someone who really wants to be with you won't keep you guessing for years about their intentions. I'm in a much better place now. I kept the apartment and all my furniture, obviously. I got a promotion at work that I'd been putting off pursuing because I thought Jake and I might be planning a wedding. I've reconnected with friends I neglected while I was focused on fixing my relationship with Jake, and you know what? I'm actually grateful this happened when it did. I could have wasted even more years waiting for someone who was never going to follow through. Instead, I'm 29, financially stable, living in a beautiful apartment with furniture I love, and I'm not settling for anyone's empty promises ever again. As for Jake and his new fiancée, I genuinely hope they're happy together. But I also hope she asked for a timeline and got a real answer, not just vague promises about someday, because if there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that someday without a plan is just a polite way of saying never. So, that's my story. If you're in a relationship where someone keeps promising you a future but never taking concrete steps to make it happen, please don't waste 5 years like I did. Have the hard conversations early, ask for specifics, and don't let anyone make you feel crazy for wanting clarity about your own life. And if someone tries to steal your furniture after stringing you along for years, well, make sure you keep your receipts. Trust me on that one.